The Shift is brought to you by SE Healthcare. Welcome to The Shift. I'm Dr. Andrea Coyle. Hello, Shifties, and welcome back to the next episode of the Shift podcast. Dr. Andrea Coyle here. I'm so excited today. I have a really special friend, a really knocked out super advocate for nursing, Dr. Jeanne Venella. Dr. Jeanne Venella, welcome to the Shift podcast.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. The word shift has been important to me for my entire career.
I love it. And we've been trying to make this happen for months. And if you would, please tell our fellow Shifties about yourself.
I would say I had an early traditional career, probably a dinosaur. I stayed at one organization for 25 years, which I don't think we'll see very much in the future. Traditional academic children's hospital, worked in the emergency department at various levels for 25 years. And then shifting and really being engaged or pulled to take a leap of faith, I went to work with a leading emergency department consulting company to refine, refurbish, change emergency departments across the country. And it was a big leap of faith for not only myself, but for my employer, who was also a nurse. He wasn't 100% sure that children's hospital would be transferable into the adult world. And as we quickly found out, that process improvement is process improvement, whether you're moving a 3-pound patient or a 300-pound patient, the concepts of improvement and interim leadership are still the same. So I did that for 10 years all around the country. And I had the pleasure of really taking emergency departments that were struggling to the next level for improvement, and some that were good to great. And so I learned as much as the clients learned from me. Completing my doctorate opened up a whole new world for me. And then I made another major shift. And that's when I went into the tech world. And what I recognized about the tech world is that technology, even 12 years ago, was impacting the ability for nurses to care for patients. There were nurses on certain boards, there were nurses on certain implementations, but there were no nurses at design and programming prior to implementation. So what you saw was nurses doing workarounds the minute some new technology was introduced, and an adoption rate was very low of that technology. So I now am the Chief Nursing Officer for Commure under the Strongline platform, which is a wearable duress button for staff for workplace violence. And these last 4 years, I've dedicated my work to keeping staff safe at work, because the emergency department has taken a huge increase in workplace violence, and what the staff are being exposed to on a daily basis is scary nonetheless.
Wow. That was such a great introduction. And it's interesting. We've met multiple times, and I didn't know all the shifts that you've had in your career. And it's funny, much like you, I spent many, many years, more than a decade at one organization. And after the pandemic, I made a shift, and then I made another shift. And I think with every shift comes new knowledge. It's a way to grow. The DMP was worked in there as well. And I think that's an important message for people that are new in their nursing careers, people that are looking for a shift or to do something different. And that's one thing I have to say I love so much about the profession of nursing. Look at all the shifts you've made and all the things you've learned. And I think about that. And I really want to send that message to any of the shifties that are listening today, that if you really want to take a leap of faith, if you want to make a shift, this profession affords you that opportunity. So I want to throw that out there. The other thing I want to dig deep into as an expert in the emergency department is talk to me and talk to the shifties on the podcast a little bit more about workplace violence in the emergency department.
Yeah, before we go to workplace violence, let me add on to your comment about nursing, as a whole. So I teach at the Villanova College of Nursing, and I do some work with undergrads, mostly peer mentoring or mentoring or guidance. And to add on to your comment about nursing, I explain to entry-level students or students who are at a different degree, changing perhaps specialties, that the only limit is their imagination. That's the only limit, because there is anything they can do. You know, I myself, I don't know if you read my recent blog about baseball. You could be the nurse at the Citizens Bank Park where the Philadelphia Phillies play. You could be a cruise ship nurse. You can be an academic. You can be doing what we're doing here. All new, inventive, crazy thoughts for nurses. So the sky is the limit.
The sky is the limit. Jeannie,
So
you're so right.
So workplace violence, it's not new to the emergency department. I was a new grad, and I almost shudder to say when that was, a very long time ago. And on a New Year's Eve, I had, kind of an incident with a patient that I didn't think too much about at the time. And it was a time when police officers and emergency department nurses had a better camaraderie, and they were in the department, and they quickly, escorted the gentleman out of the department. But now, when you think back, you think it was still there, 40 years ago, we'll say. But fast forward, and we have to lean on our friends at Press Ganey. They do the most up-to-date statistics. 2 nurses an hour in our country are injured at work. Think about that at the end of the day. I think about that when I do this presentation. 2 nurses will be injured by the time this podcast is over somewhere in our country. And not just, maybe spit on or, but physically assaulted. And not that spitting isn't an assault, but I'm just saying violent acts on our staff are happening. So the work I'm doing now is, with a piece of technology that is just one spoke in the wheel of solving workplace violence. You need to have an authentic leadership committee that is looking at workplace violence from every angle, from security through quality, through Joint Commission regulations. I mean, the whole 360. And we as technology are one small piece of that. And the impacts of workplace violence, there's nothing that's not touched when someone is injured at work, right? So staff safety is a bottom line of Maslow. Food, air, water, safety. You can't give exceptional care if you're scared to death in the patient's room that you're going to be injured, or that you have to bring a buddy into the room because the patient is so verbally assaulting every time you go in there. So staff engagement suffers with workplace violence. Patient satisfaction suffers with workplace violence. And most importantly, your quality metrics decrease because, if you're in the room scared to death, you're not looking as closely at time to antibiotics and blood culture draw as you would if you were not under such duress in the room. So everything is impacted by workplace violence. So when a committee or a hospital really looks at how to solve, what to do, de-escalation training, all the things that are important, it has to be that full circle, a complement of tools and technology.
And how would you describe how, I'm going to say, almost living in fear sometimes, or really not even wanting to come to work? How does that contribute to burnout?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to lead us into a conversation a little bit about workplace violence and burnout. And what I've seen in my career, emergency departments often have mass exodus upon mass exodus. I worked in a level 1 trauma,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden half your staff would flip out of the emergency department. And a lot of it was because of the workplace violence.
Right.
So if we could just start to talk about that and burnout.
Yeah, it's goes back to that authentic leadership, right? So if you have a clear, transparent communication in your department and your hospital, then staff feel free to report. They're not being accused of having egged on the patient, right? Like, what did you do to deserve that? It's a no tolerance. We have no place in our hospital for workplace violence. So what you see, if it's not an authentic leader or a clear path to success for workplace violence is you see more missed shifts, more call outs, longer LOAs if there's injury. There's a fear to come back to work. You see higher turnover. And we know in our country that 72% of all staff on night shift right now in our country have less than 2 years experience. So where did they learn from someone like you and I, like those key words and phrases to help de-escalate a patient, the body mechanics of de-escalation? So if you're learning from someone else who's been there 2 years or less, that you're not always sharing the best information, right? You're doing the best you can at that moment. But when it's silent, it kills, because then there's no exit interview, and you don't say, I'm leaving because I was assaulted at work 3 times last week. You just kind of have left and not given a reason why you've left. You may suddenly not come back from your shift. You see it masked in a lot of different ways if it's not truthful. Increased sick calls, like I said before, and just not participating in unit activities, shared governance, things like that would make the unit better. When people don't feel safe, they don't really want to contribute.
Many years ago, there was a nurse that was this is going back, but had one of those like landline big old telephones launched at her.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing the leader said was, what did you say to him to provoke that? And that story hasn't left me, and I still remember it. And what can we say to our newer nurses, or any nurse for that matter, when a leader says that to you? What is a good response to that? Because that often nurses don't have the skill set to be able to come back and have a really purposeful, intentional thought when it's almost like it's your fault.
Right. I think honesty and emotion is where you can lead with. You can say, it's very hurtful to me that you think I would provoke a patient. I'm not here to be, I'm not here to provoke patients. I'm here to take care of patients. The other thing is, that's a clear message that you're maybe not working for the leader that you should be working for, if that's the response, right? And sometimes that brings clarity to your decision if you're on the fence about that. But when they don't have your back, and you certainly don't deserve to be accused of that, and you did nothing to this disruptive patient. It was just, there's many reasons why patients are disruptive. And we could talk about that level of incivility in our country, for another hour. But that has to be a clue to you that you might not be working for the leader that you should be working for. And then you have to say, when you accuse me of that, it's hurtful to me, right? You're not accusing that person of being a poor leader. You're just saying, when you use those words, it's hurtful to me. Always bringing it back to how you feel, right? And not, we learned that. But here's the thing: when you were newer to practice nurse, and you probably did it, you got the right line to say in the car driving home. You're like, oh, I wish I would have said that. Or how did I let that person offend me like that and not stand up for myself? But oftentimes in that heat of the moment, and remember, you've just been assaulted in some way. So, the response of that leader should be, oh my God, please sit down. Then they cover your assignment. They make sure you're fine. They send you to occupational health, or not occupational health. They send you home, or you have a calming room in your department where you can go, and maybe someone could come and talk to you, assess whether or not you're capable of coming back to that shift. But really, you should be relieved of your duty right away until all those assessments are done. I worked with a student a few years back who kind of created it was like kind of called a code violet. So when a staff member was either in a critical incident or was injured at work, there was kind of like a response team that went to that employee to make sure that they had everything they needed for that day, and then assuring short-term and long-term recovery versus just putting a Band-Aid on it and saying you're good, go back to your shift.
Okay, I might be putting you on the spot for this question, but what would you say to leaders that come at nurses in that way? What not only what would you say to them, Jeannie, but how would you coach them on thinking differently before they come at the nurse?
You know, feedback is a gift and it depends on how you open it, right? So someone may say something like that seemed to me, that seemed like a harsh response to that employee, or it seems like, you know that old analogy when you only have a hammer, then everything is a nail. Like, it seems like you need some more tools, some new tools. And, I just had this discussion with some friends this past weekend about how healthcare is different now. Every business is. I actually was talking to a surgeon and an attorney, and we were talking about how the emphasis is on keeping the newer to practice employees engaged. And so what about us crusty old timers? And the time to being a crusty old timer is gone, right? We are in a 6th-generation workplace now. It used to be 3 or 4. If you can't, or your first response is always that the employee was wrong, then you need to look in the mirror and say, what's wrong with me? I just think that we have to hold them accountable as much as we hold the newer to practice staff accountable. And somebody has to say that feedback. Boy, everything seems like it's a nail because all you do is hammer.
Is burnout costing your organization its best nurses? How do you know? SE Healthcare can help. Our evidence-based approach helps nurse leaders boost retention, enhance job satisfaction, and elevate patient care quality while reducing burnout at an impressive 52%. You ready to uncover burnout's impact on your team? Visit sehealthcaresolutions.com for the free assessment today. We have to be able to have courageous conversations, not just with our peers, but sometimes with the person that you report to. And some people receive it well and some people don't. And I had a really great mentor one time say to me, when someone gives you feedback, it's up to you to decide what you want to do with that feedback.
That's
And you
right.
can either
It's a
grow
gift.
from the feedback. It's a gift. And you really truly have a great friend, partner, peer, whatever the case may be, if they're willing to share that courageous conversation with you. Some of my best learning moments in my entire career have been from people that were courageous enough to say, "Oh, Andrea, did you think of it this way?" Or, "Ooh, that was a little harsh." Whatever the case may be, biggest lessons learned and so valuable and a gift. And so
That's
I'm
right.
always appreciative when people are willing to do that. I have another question, Jeannie. Do you know off the top of your head, and you may not, are there states in the United States that if a nurse is assaulted in the emergency department, there is nothing can happen to the patient? There's no charges filed, or is that
Well,
a crime in
I
every state?
think look at it the other way. I think there's only 1 or 2 states in the country. I think Texas is leading the way, where it's an assault, I think a felony assault. Texas is leading the way. And that's one thing that I would guide the shifties listening to, is the Emergency Nurses Association is really taking advocacy to a new level with, they do the Day on the Hill at Capitol Hill with our state senators and Congress people, and they're pushing for not state legislation, right? Not state by state, but a kind of a universal assault legislation, I guess is the best way to do it, for staff. Now, there are some places where it's silly enough that if an emergency department staff member is injured, but a float nurse from the med-surg floors down in the ED, it's not the same level because they're not really an emergency department. It's ridiculous, right? And you think about it, I told you already, 2 nurses will be injured by the time this is over. If one airline attendant is assaulted on air, we see it all on the evening news. that night, right? And why doesn't that happen when a nurse is, violently attacked in a hospital and breaks her arm or slashes their face or his face? We have to start to think about it in that same kind of respect, that it has to be no tolerance legislation, as strong as it is for the airlines. So I encourage you to look at the ENA webpage of what they're doing. The current president, Chris Dellinger, is really an advocate for workplace violence. It's been her platform. The new president starting in 2025, Ryan Oglesby, he also is an advocate, a former emergency department nurse, PhD educated, looking at ways to really advocate for their 50,000 members. And they are one, I should say they're only one group of nurses really that are really assaulted. Let's think about our behavioral health nurses. Let's think about our neuro ICU nurses. Yeah. And then let's think about, all the healthcare workers that take care of the behavior challenged young adults and children who are injured, even though it may not be with an assault intent, yet they are still injured, by what they are facing every day at work. So we are one large group, but we know again from Press Ganey that the psych units and the ICUs are not immune to these difficulties in workplace violence.
I think that's a really great point. And what I'd really love to do, Jeannie, is invite you back to the shift in a couple of months, and let's just continue to have this conversation. I think a lot of the information you shared is thought-provoking. The statistics are staggering. And as healthcare leaders, we've got to really make sure that we can keep our nurses safe.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's incredible. Typically, we end the podcast with a couple takeaways that we want to share with the shifties. So do you have any takeaways?
Well, I think the takeaway, I think two things. We have to think about what I said about the practice numbers, the very high percentage of new to practice nurses, and how we respond in their onboarding, education, and our behaviors, right? We have to embrace youth, because we are going to want to retire at some point. And if we don't share our knowledge, right? So that's one thing that post-COVID, we had this giant wisdom walkout, right? Nurses my age, your age, all said, that's it. I'm going to go and I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But that wisdom, that problem solving, that intuition, that guidance, that kind of permeated the units all left. And now we have new and younger to practice that don't have that to lean on. So I think we have to be very cautious, and I think we have to be very kind, and we have to always think about what we felt like when we were new to practice, and not ever let ourselves forget that, because the things that we're talking about today, workplace violence, technology, shifting, that's not part of our normal curriculum in education, right? And so you and I were both exposed to people that allowed us to think that way. So we have to continue to expose the youth in our profession today in that way. And that's why you and I met at conferencing. Like, I love conferencing. I know it's a little bit old fashioned, but I love being in the exhibit hall, feeling the energy, feeling the camaraderie and the networking, and meeting some of my older friends, but bringing along some youth with me so they can experience that kind of camaraderie at conferences.
I think networking is really important in nursing, and understanding different perspectives and understanding what different people bring, and that this is true diversity and inclusion at its best. Mm-hmm. When we can get all these different perspectives and all these different skill sets together to make the world a better place, to provide better care for our patients, to encourage and influence our new to practice nurses. And so I just want to thank you. I'm so proud to call you friend, fellow nurse. I love your energy. I love your knowledge and your skill set. I can't wait for you to come back to the podcast. So thank you again.
I love to talk about workplace violence. I know it's a terrible topic. My mom always says, she's 92, don't you miss taking care of patients? And there's part of me that says yes, but part of me that says this environment is so hard now that what I'm doing from my perspective in my seat now in technology is, I hope I'm making it better and safer for lots of staff, not just who was under my direct supervision in the past. So keeping everybody safe is really a passion of mine.
And I love that you say that, Jeannie, because when I made the shift to work for SE Healthcare, which is a company laser focused on clinician burnout, I feel like now, because I am so passionate about this profession and I want all nurses to stay healthy and be safe, I'm just so passionate about bringing to light all the impact that burnout has on this great profession, but ultimately burned out clinicians, the impact it has on society. There's a societal impact, there's a financial impact. And I think the important thing for shifties to recognize is whatever your passion is, you can still go out there and make a difference, whether you're in direct care or you're doing what you and I do. And I just, that's why I love this profession so much. I always end this, Jeannie, by saying, shifties, remember, your shift makes the difference. Enjoying the shift? Help us reach more nurse leaders by rating and reviewing us on your podcast app. It takes just a minute, but makes a big impact. Search for The Shift, tap those stars, and share what you love. Your feedback shapes our future episodes and helps others discover us. Remember, rate, review, and amplify The Shift today.